I was watching you singing from the back of the room in the squatted factory outside the city. You shook the world
around like that.
Ukulele.
The hole, yeah, and then put it in there. Great. And then kind of put the soil in around it, kind of, what's called, tamping it down. So it's not so loose, so it's like tight enough where the roots will hold in there. Okay, you got a hole there?
Keen senses, your sincere words and your good intentions. And I was watching you singing from the back of the room of love and scars of when you broke through the police lines and you made it to the square. And there's something that connects us, you can smell it in the air. When they murdered Alexandros, the banks began to burn, and they patrolled the streets, but you were there at every turn. And the world will not soon forget what happened there. And there's something that connects us, you can smell it in the air. About the Friday marches from a friend of a friend. Said you've been murdered in jail, but you come back again. Said you stared into the soldiers' eyes and they didn't seem to care. And there's something that connects us, you can smell it in the air. I saw a picture on the internet, you were rising like a flame, and the water from the hoses poured like rain. At the barricades, attacks and vomit was everywhere. And there's something that connects us, you can smell it in the air. Heard you didn't stop marching like it was 1965, and your so-called leaders flew to town to keep you in line. But you broke the curfew openly and your hands were in the air. And there's something that connects us, you can smell it in the air. And there's something that connects us. Thanks, y'all. All right, we're gonna do a song about my home city. one of the realities of where I'm from is that if you're outside of Baltimore and somebody asks where I'm from, I say I'm from Baltimore. If I'm inside of Baltimore, I say I'm from Towson, which is a suburb of Baltimore. If I'm in Towson, I say I'm from Lutherville, which is a suburb of that suburb. And that's, you know, it's fun. It's a fun little thing, but it's also part of that is the reality behind racial segregation in the city where I'm from, because I am white, and a lot of white folks aren't from the city. The city is 70% black. It became that way in the beginning in the 70s when factories, you know, Baltimore is part of the Rust Belt, so when the steel mill shut down and the car factory shut down and all the stuff associated with it shut down, we had something called white flight, where all the, not all, but a lot of the white folks who had a little bit of money, mobility, as we say, and had the ability to leave, they moved out to the suburbs or they moved to other cities. So suburbs like mine grew, and my neighbor growing up, my white neighbor growing up, was a foreman at the auto factory, and so he moved to the suburbs. Other folks didn't have that money, so they stayed, and Baltimore went from predominantly white to predominantly black. It went from predominantly manufacturing to predominantly a service economy. Crack cocaine came in the 80s. The heroin hit in the mid-70s, and it's never left. And Baltimore is today the most dangerous city in the United States. We have a substantial homeless population, not actually one of the largest ones in the U.S., but like most cities, substantial in this country. So every year, there's a few days of the year where it's so cold that the city has decided it's too dangerous to be homeless, which is very ironic. When you're in the largest city in the richest state in the richest country in the world. Maryland is the richest state, thanks to a lot of arms manufacturers who have their headquarters there, like Lockheed Martin. So here we are with 4,000 or 5,000 homeless people, and the city says it's too cold to be homeless. We're going to put you in these emergency shelters called Code Blue shelters, which are like prisons for the night that are warm prisons. And then what happens to them afterwards? They're put back on the street. So it's just so ironic that a couple days a year the city cares enough to try to solve the problem for one night. And meanwhile, because of the white flight that I mentioned, we have 35,000 abandoned houses. Those are just the houses. We have a lot of other abandoned spaces that can be converted into housing. And those are illegal for homeless people to live in, because that would be dangerous for them. That would, you know, be a violation of the health and safety code. So it's fine to sleep under the bridge, but you can't sleep in the house. There's a song I wrote about that. It's called See It Yourself, and it's kind of like written to some unnamed members of my family and other people who refuse to recognize if an alien came and visited Baltimore, it would be very easy for them to identify the problem. They would say, interesting that these people who have darker skin seem to live much, much worse lives and be deprived of a lot of access to all these different things. But for some reason, someone who grew up right outside of that city, who's white, can still say, well, I don't understand why they don't just buy a house. These things. This is called See It Yourself. In the largest city in the richest state, in the richest country in history, priorities displayed, the uninsured and underpaid. We can see it all yourself. You see the glass towers rise above a ruined bay, amidst tens of thousands living in poverty. Well, the money changes hands, though it never touches land. We can see it all yourself. And it's a cold blue freeze on a winter's night. You hear the politicians feigning compassion. Well, temporary care, that's all that they can spare. You can see it all yourself. When you give bread to the poor, you're a saint. We've heard if you ask why they're poor, you're communist. What of those who hoard the bread on the road to fortune? The revolving door exchange between the state and the corporate is murdered by another name any less tragic? Does it make you less ashamed if you refuse to recognize it? You can see it all yourself. Now we'll do a hopeful song about Baltimore. As you may know, not long after Ferguson, my city too popped off. And it started with the sad death of a young man named Freddie Gray. And so, you know, black folks in Baltimore have been telling people for a long time how corrupt the police are, and that cops are out dealing drugs and planting weapons on people and all this stuff. And people, you know, they don't get interviewed on the news about it. No one really looks into it too much. And then you get cops caught live on their own body cameras, and the whole nation gets to see it on video of them planting drugs at a crime scene, and then they deny it. A cop gets caught running a heroin ring out of the police station parking lot. Well, he was just one of the bad ones, you know, it happens. These cops kill Freddie Gray, 4 cops, bunch of video evidence of it. They say that he killed himself in the back of the wagon. They intimidate the other guy who was in there and tell him to lie. He gets out of prison and says he was told to lie, that they didn't put Freddie Gray in a seatbelt, and then they drove around really fast over speed bumps to bump him in the air while he had a broken leg, and he died. It's called a rough ride. Black people in Baltimore have been telling people for years about the rough ride, and no one believed them until Freddie Gray died, and it came out, and the cops admitted, we gave him a rough ride. Okay. So now we have 8 cops, or 7 cops, that just all got found guilty. They were robbing drug dealers and suspected drug dealers of money, stealing drugs from drug dealers, reselling those drugs on the streets. Had another cop in Philly who was distributing heroin in Philadelphia, given to him, sold to him by police in Baltimore. They were planting guns on people. They were planting plastic guns on people, fake guns. They were planting drugs regularly, habitually. After the Baltimore uprising, after Freddie Gray died, when we had 2 weeks of massive demonstrations and 2 nights of rioting, the murder rate doubled in Baltimore, and the police went on this sort of unofficial work slowdown where they were like, well, if you guys don't like us, we won't do our job then. And gangs took advantage of that. People took advantage of it, and people claimed new territory. There was gang truces, but other gangs didn't go on truce. And what the media said was the murder rate doubled. We said the murder rate doubled because the cops went on this sort of strike, and the city's still completely screwed up, and a lot of things happened. And people were really frustrated because they demonstrated for 2 weeks and nothing changed. And these cops went on trial for killing Freddie Gray, and every single one of them walked out free after the trial. And everyone knew that was going to happen, so people are frustrated. What the media said was, well, the pharmacies were looted, which was true. A few pharmacies were looted, and all these pharmaceuticals hit the streets, and that's what caused the increase in crime. Well, guess what? They found out in the court case of these 7 cops who were on trial. One of them showed up at the other one's house in the early morning. He said, dude, open the garage. He opened the garage, closed the garage, opens his car. He's got trash bags filled with looted pharmaceuticals that these cops then sold on the streets of Baltimore. So, interesting. And that's why there was an uprising. And this is a song I wrote in between the Baltimore uprising and the Ferguson uprising, and it was about this process that we see again and again and again and again. People, especially black people in the U.S., they come out to the streets. They're very angry. Our uprising started with riots, and then it turned into protests. And the same characters come out. The mayor comes out. The city council person comes out. They find a distant cousin of the person who was killed, and they come out. And the head of some liberal organization comes out, and they all say, please calm down, don't be violent, just, we'll work this out, telling these kids whose lives are so screwed up, who are the targets of this violence, that they need to just shut up and let these professionals deal with it, who've been in charge of the problem the whole time. And amazingly, while all this was happening, sorry, this is a long story, but it's fascinating. The white manager of the Baltimore Orioles, our baseball team, you know, like quintessential white baseball dad. I know my dad is one, so I know the character really well. Like he looks like my dad, so he's, you know, very baseball. And they asked him, because the Orioles, we tried to invade the stadium on the first night of the uprising during a baseball game, so they had to lock the fans in. So the next game they had, they didn't allow any fans to come, and the Orioles had to play to an empty stadium, which is, you know, not normal, because it wasn't safe for them, apparently. And they asked the manager of the Orioles, well, what do you think about all this violence out? And, you know, and honestly, it wasn't that violent. It could have been so much worse. What do you think about all this, you know? And he was like, about what? And they were like, about the riots and all of this. And he said, I mean, you know, they said, well, what would you do? I mean, you know, how would you react? Is this how you would behave? And he said, you know what? In such a baseball coach way. He goes, you know, I hate questions like that. You know why? Because you say, well, what would you do? You know what? I don't know what I would do. I've never been black, and neither have you. So just slow down a little bit. That's what he said. And the whole city was like, oh my God, you're amazing. Buck Showalter, that's his name. And they said, well, what about the empty stadium? You know, they told your fans they couldn't come. And he said, look, inside the stadium, we're playing a game. Outside, that's real life out there. This is just a game. This doesn't matter that much. It's amazing, you know? And so this is a song I wrote about that whole process and the spirit of the people. It's called Light in the Morning. Call out the spokesman and PR magician. See what you can save from collapsing. Call out the cameras and media darlings to tell you it's not really happening. And call out the guardsmen and the soldiers who fight to occupy the towns they were born in. Call out the cops who fired the shots, but the crowds will be back in the morning. And take to the streets now, this world's rearranging. Show us something that we can believe in. The whole generation that's been scared of dreaming is rising like light in the morning. Call out the mayors and governors too for the empty rhetorical promise. Call out the council to stand by their side and butcher the concept of justice. And take to the streets now, this world's rearranging. Show us something that we can believe in. A whole generation that's been scared of dreaming is rising like light in the morning. Call out the president, see if he dares to disrupt the system he's serving. Call out the senators destined for power, see him hide like rats in the kitchen. And take to the streets now, this world's rearranging. Show us something that we can believe in. A whole generation that's been scared of dreaming is rising like light in the morning. We're rising like light in the morning. Thanks. We'll do a couple fun songs. Okay? Yeah. Fun by my standards, so don't get too pumped up yet. I'm gonna do a soft one real quick, and then we'll do another one. So I wrote this song about a friend of mine named Shireen, who is part of my trio, which is sadly based mostly in Europe. Shireen lives in Amsterdam, and Kareem lives in London. But some of the songs I'm playing tonight are from my trio. And what we do is we combine Arabic and American protest folk music over the sounds of my guitar and Kareem's oud, which is the Arabic lute, that great ancestor of most stringed instruments in the West, especially the guitar. And that's what we do. Long story to this song, but I won't tell the whole thing. The long story short, we drove from Brussels. We had played a show, in Ghent, in another town in Belgium. We had played a show there, and we had a show the next night in Paris, me and Shireen. And we were driving in her VW camper van. And it's like a 2.5-hour drive or something. And it takes us 7 hours. And I had no idea why, but we were super, super, super late for our concert. I'm talking 3 hours late. And we get to this squatted pharmaceutical factory that had been taken over by a bunch of punks, which was very interesting. I was mostly upset because there was a foosball tournament and I missed it. And I really, really like foosball. So, especially in Europe, that's where you get good at foosball. You play against the greats, you know? But we get there super late, and I was in such a bad mood, just such an absolute bad mood. We had just driven through the fields where the First World War had happened, and the trenches, and I was just looking out the window thinking about war for 7 hours. And then I get to a city I hate, Paris. That's right, some people nodding there, yeah. And then we're playing a show in this squatted pharmaceutical factory. I also hate the pharmaceutical industry, so here I am. But the people were lovely, and everyone was drunk on wine by the time we got there, and it was super awkward. And they were like, well, do you want to still play? There's some people still awake, you know? And Shireen's like, let's do it. And I was like, oh, fine, okay, whatever. And I sat in the back, super grumpy, while Shireen played a show to like 8 people, sunk into these couches drunk. And Shireen played the most amazing set of songs, and she completely changed my mood, if not the whole room. And I came out of her set so ready to perform, and so filled with like the ability of music and conversation to just completely change people's mentality and their emotions. I wrote the song about it about a year later. I forgot the best part of the story is that we're on the phone 3 hours late for our show, and we're on the phone with the person, and they're like, we're at the address, and we're like in this really posh part of Paris, and we're like, I don't think there's a squatted pharmaceutical factory in this super rich neighborhood. And the guy's like, well, it's the same address. We said, yeah, and he's like, well, just make sure you're not in Paris, because we're in the town, you know, a suburb of Paris. And we're like, no, I think we're in the right place. And we're driving through this intersection, and like I see the Eiffel Tower, and we're definitely in the dead center of Paris. And we're like, I think we're actually in Paris. So then, anyways, here we go. Now you'll understand the first verse. I was watching you singing from the back of the room, in the squatted factory outside the city. You shook the world with your ukulele. And I was moved by your movements, and the way you swayed back and forth, with your shy smile and your keen senses, your sincere words and your good intentions. And I was watching you singing from the back of the room, of love and scars, of exile and war, of heroes and friendship, and knowing what they're for. And I got lost in your melodies, and in the echoes of your words, well, hope arises from fear and pain. We can help transform them with the songs we sing. I was watching you singing from the back of the room, in the squatted factory outside the city. You shook the world with your ukulele. Song I wrote about 3 friends, a photojournalist, a journalist, and a musician. It's about doing stuff you don't get paid a lot for that can sometimes get you killed or imprisoned, or just can be bad for your health or leave you unemployed and broke at 34, like me. I digress. It's not about me, but it's partially about me. It's called Do What We Can, and it's also about you, and it's about this mentality that we get as activists sometimes where we're trying to do too much in too little time, all the time, and then we get depressed and burned out and jaded, and then we stop, or we just end up depressed and blah, 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 blah. And we have to always push ourselves, but we also have to realize that we're not superheroes, we're human beings, and we have to do the things we can do to make the changes we can make, push ourselves enough to be driven, but not so much that we look back and say, I haven't done anything meaningful ever, which a lot of people do. You traveled 7,000 miles with a backpack and guitar, on crowded old buses in the scorching summer sun, for the passion of the politics and the people you'd perform, for crowds of 13 people on a dusty basement floor. And I love that about you. You traveled 7,000 miles with a backpack and guitar, and gave it 100% no matter where you were. Yeah, and this is what we do, my friend, yeah, this is who we are. We will reach only those we can reach, but we will reach them. Traveled 7,000 miles with a camera in your hand, to disrupt the scripted narratives of camouflage command, to expose injustice, to expose the lies we're fed. Well, you captured on a memory card what was pacing through your head, and I love that about you. Traveled 7,000 miles with a camera in your hand, knowing not if you'd return home to see your friends again. Yeah, and this is what we do, my friend, we do the things we can. We will reach only those we can reach, but we will reach them. We will reach only those we can reach, but we will reach them. You traveled 7,000 miles unembedded and unconfined, with a notebook and a microphone and questions in your mind. Well, you came to write the stories that opened up our eyes to truths about this planet that the papers tried to hide, and I love that about you. You traveled 7,000 miles unembedded and unconfined, to write posts for a free blog for anyone to find. Yeah, this is what we do, we can only reach so high. We will reach only those we can reach, but we will reach them. We will reach only those we can reach, but we will reach them. Thanks, everybody. And thank you all for having me in your lovely basement.
Everyone, Ryan Harvey. Woo!
All the way from Baltimore.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. Awesome. Loved it. Thanks again for being here, guys. If you want to hang out for just a little while, we are going to have Victoria give a presentation on planting your garden. So we're going to set up for that. Feel free to mill around, hang out, check things out, and we'll be back.
I am the agriculture program coordinator for Marion County Extension. And I work with gardeners and farmers as well as agritourism operators. And so I've been asked to talk a bit today about the very basics of gardening, which is a really great place to start if you've got seeds available for your potting pleasure and also potting in the back. We're going to go over what the very basics of starting your own garden is, including the location and what you need to think about in terms of your plant needs. So you'll have to excuse me because I love audience participation. You know you're an educator when. There are really only 3 things that a plant needs to be happy and to survive or thrive, really. And if you can give those 3 things to your plants, then your plants are going to be very happy campers. Does anybody have any ideas what those 3 things might be?
Light.
Hey, exactly, light. Sunlight or from a lamp.
Water.
Water, exactly.
Nutrients. Love.
Love is the 4th thing, yes. But nutrients, I heard before that, and that's absolutely correct. Plants need sunlight, water, and nutrients. Usually nutrients are found in the soil, but you can also grow plants in hydroponic systems where you feed the nutrients through the water. And the interesting thing about those 3 things is that they actually, you can't ever have just 2 because they won't play off each other. If you have nutrients in the soil and you have sunlight in the sky, but no water, the plant actually can't suck up the nutrients from the soil. Similarly, if you have water in the soil and you have nutrients in the soil, but there's no sunlight, the plant doesn't uptake it. Because the plants have a genius invention. Their vascular system is just a straw. Which is why plants don't have muscles. But the sun evaporates water off of the leaves of the plant, and the plant uses that tension to suck up the water and the nutrients that are in that water through its roots, which is so flippin' cool. How did they come up with that? I don't know. It's genius. They expend no energy moving nutrients around their system. So, now that you're all experts in what plants need, the next most important thing to consider when you're growing plants in a garden setting is location, location, location. Just like real estate. Where you put your garden has a huge impact on what you're going to get out of it. You can grow a garden in many different contexts, but if you have heavy clay soils in a rainy, shady area, you're going to grow a very different garden than what you might grow in sandy soils with lots of sun exposure and not a whole lot of precipitation. So you need to take that into consideration when you're thinking about what plants you want to grow. The ideal garden situation has good airflow because lots of pests and diseases are going to arise if you don't have a whole lot of airflow. You're going to grow molds, you're going to grow all sorts of yucky stuff on your plants that you don't necessarily want to be there. You also want to have sunlight for most of your vegetable crops. The happiest of the vegetable crops, well, I should say, the ones that we most typically eat in a Western diet and plant in our gardens require 6 to 8 hours of sunlight a day, which is not your typical summer day, right? We have tons of sunlight in the peak of summer, which is good news because that means that you can have things that provide shade across your garden for you as a human in your garden. You might want some shade to shield you from the summer rays. And you as a human are also a very important part of where the garden is, because if you choose to locate a garden in a place that is far, or you have a community garden that's across town, or if you have a garden that's at the back of your yard, or you have a garden on your apartment porch that you never ever go to, then it's not going to be a happy, healthy garden because you are not partaking in the garden environment. So does anybody here have a garden currently? Awesome. Yeah, I know you guys do. I've seen yours. But where is your garden at?
Out of Kaiser, out in the country.
Yeah. Do you have a lot of, like, what's the environment look like?
It's good. It's nice soil, kind of sandy and stuff, but I've got quite a bit of sun. I picked a nice spot. So, and good airflow and stuff through there. So, pretty nice spot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lots of water.
Excellent. Yeah, water sources are very important. Making sure you have access to water for those plants to be particularly happy. And I will say that not all plants want exactly the same thing, just like not everybody in your life wants to be treated the same. Ooh. And not every computer wants the same things either. Ooh. See if I can. How do I get out of here? Ugh. I tried to escape and I didn't like that one.
Oh, I've escaped too many times. Oh, we're so...
It's thinking.
Oh no.
I know, what do you do? What do you do when?
What do you do when...
All right, well, in the meantime, I have these handy dandy pictures that I love to pass out when thinking about gardens, because it's really fun not only to think about where your garden space may be, but what it might look like. So feel free to take a perusal. And we shall see. Oh, there we go.
Getting there. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you.
No worries. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Technical difficulties. Yeah, see, I knew that would capture your attention. Also, something to think about when you are locating your garden is, I was just talking to Derek about this, is the physical environment that surrounds your garden. So you might have the perfect little patch that you want to grow all of your tomatoes and watermelons in, but maybe it's right next to a giant sequoia. When thinking about where your garden is going, you need to think about fences that are nearby or trees that are nearby, or if you're in a community garden plot and your community garden neighbor has planted nothing but corn, you're going to have a hard time growing plants in the middle of the summertime if your garden gets shaded out. That's not to say that any crop is not going to do well there. There are plants that really love growing in the shade, like a lot of lettuces really prefer to grow in the shade or dappled sunlight in the summertime because that intense sunshine wilts their leaves. Mints also really prefer to be in the shade, and some of those cool season crops like brassicas, radishes, broccoli can handle a little more shade than their friends over in the tomato family. Tomatoes really love sunlight. An important thing to know about the sun in relation to your garden is that you it behooves you to face your garden south in the northern hemisphere. If in the southern hemisphere, you want to face it the other way. But we actually get more sunshine from the south than in any other direction, just because of the way that the earth is tilted. And so if you focus on planting your shortest plants in the southerly direction, plant your taller plants behind it, you will see the most possible sunlight for all of your plants, which is a handy dandy thing to remember. So we talked about sunlight, now we're going to talk about soil. Soil is not to be confused with dirt. Does anyone know the difference between dirt and soil? No? Too shy? So dirt is a dirty little four-letter word that just means tiny little rocks put together. There's no life, there's no nothing. It's just minerals and rocks in very small forms. Soil is actually the living substrate that is going to promote growth in your plants. It's got bugs in it, it's got worms in it, it's got tiny bacteria and decomposers eating all the stuff that's dead in the soil, and it's also got quite a bit of organic matter, which is not the organic stuff that's certified and you buy from the grocery store, but rather it's anything that was living and is full of carbon. And all of that stuff mixed together with the rocks and the nutrients that dirt provides makes soil, and it makes a really great, hospitable, nurturing environment for plants to grow out of. So what can you do to make your dirt more like soil? Well, you can add a whole lot of compost to the top of it, and that's either through compost that you've made out of your garden or your kitchen scraps. You can make compost really easily in your own backyard, so long as you don't include things like meat and cheeses in your compost. Or you can purchase it from garden stores or various composting facilities around, and add that to your garden, because it adds water retention capabilities to your soil and helps keep those nutrients in the soil, helps keep the water and nutrients available to your plants. This is more of the same, but with a caveat to not step on your soil. It's really fun to get in there with your plants when you are gardening to check up on how they're doing. But when you have a garden, you really want to establish, if it's in the ground, I should say, you really want to establish where your feet are going to go, because every time you step on the ground, in fact, every time a raindrop falls on the ground, there's a little bit of compaction that happens. And every time you step, you squish all those soil particles closer together and make them a little bit more like cement and a little bit less like the fluffy soil you want your plants to grow in. And so if you very clearly define where your feet are going to go and keep your feet out of the garden beds, your plants will have a lot easier time sending their tender little roots into the soil. And I mentioned adding compost and various fertilizers if that's up your alley. Oftentimes, if you're working directly in the ground or even in raised beds, you're going to have to deal with weeds, and there's a lot of ways that you can prevent having to go out there every day and pull them out. Most of those include using recycled materials like cardboard boxes or straw or whatever you have access to, laying it down on top of your soil, and creating a walkway on top of that to prevent the weeds from growing. If you use things like cardboard or straw, you can actually flip that so it becomes your garden in the next season if you're willing to put some elbow grease into it and mix it all in together, because you've added carbon through your cardboard and your straw. But you do not want to put your weeds in your compost pile. This is one of the main mistakes that beginning gardeners will make. They'll take all of the weeds out of their bed and they will put them directly into the compost pile that then sits, decomposes, and then goes back onto the garden. But unless you're really good at making compost, which I encourage all of you to get good at doing, I'm not good at it yet, unless it gets to a certain temperature, those weed seeds are still going to be viable. They're still going to be alive. And after you've composted them and you put them back on your garden beds, they're just going to grow back. And you've created a cycle of a problem. If you are creating a garden bed, a raised bed, that is a really good idea in this environment, or using containers like buckets, pots, pallets that are in the back here, because it improves the drainage of the soil and it also keeps the plants warmer, which in our climate is really nice to get a head start on the season. If you're just going for flat on the ground planting, it's going to be quite a while before you can get into that soil, because if anybody's gone outside and stuck your hands in the dirt, it's wet, it's squishy, and it's very cold. And most plants their seeds will not germinate until they've reached 65 degrees. And so you're going to have to wait quite a bit until you can get seeds right in. But if you've mounded your soil, if you've created raised beds, you're growing out of containers, that soil is going to get warmer a lot faster. The water's going to drain out of it a lot faster, and you can get plants growing sooner, which if you're growing for your own consumption is really great. So what do you guys want to plant? Kale. Excellent, excellent. True Oregonian over here. Tomatoes.
Cucumbers.
Salad options.
Zucchini.
Peppers.
Yeah.
Loofah.
Loofah? I only know the loofah that's like the shower implement.
Yeah, you could grow it. I heard.
You can grow them?
I've heard. I wanted to.
All right, research question for me this weekend.
Now it's like a long cucumber thing, and then you let it dry out. I want to try that too. That sounds cool.
Is it from the ocean? No, you can grow it in a garden.
The guy I know grows it, lives in Arizona.
Yeah, I've grown it before. So yeah, a lot of it.
What? All right.
Change the teaching.
See you guys next year, and we're going to be presenting on loofahs. Awesome. Well, those are all, I don't know about the loofahs, but all of those things are definitely within the realm of possibilities in this climate. If anybody had said like mango or coffee beans, I would have been like, all right, let's talk about climate. But it seems like you guys have a pretty good grasp on how that all works. I will say that you can do some really fun things with what you're growing in terms of succession planting. So if you're thinking that you really want to have tomatoes and cucumbers in your garden, you have quite a while before you need to plant those guys. And so you can get something into the ground now. You can plant radishes and lettuces as a cool season crop that will come ready for harvest before you even need to plant your tomatoes. Like radishes, for example, only take 6 weeks from seed to harvest. It's amazing. If you're ever in doubt about what to do with an extra space in your garden, just plant radishes, because in 6 weeks you can have the same problem all over again. And then you can replace those crops with something else, like tomatoes, that'll take a little bit longer. I did bring, let's see, what's my next slide? Yeah, so I did bring some handy dandy seed packets with me. You guys you also have seeds, but if you want to take a look at a seed packet, we'll just do a quick how-to for seeds. I find that seed packets are often a confusing thing for people. And if you already know how to read a seed packet, bear with me. If not, welcome. Most plants have, they'll have their type on here. I happen to pick an okra, which you actually can grow in Oregon. But underneath it will have a variety name. And just like apples, there's tons of different varieties of apples. You go to the store and you know there's Fuji and Granny Smith and Liberty and John and Gold and all the fun ones. There's just as many varieties, if not more, of all other vegetables. So you can have hundreds varieties of watermelon, you have hundreds of varieties of tomatoes, everything you can imagine. And they're all adapted to different things. So it really pays to read the short description on the back to see what that variety is good for. Some of them might be early season, some of them might be bred for flavor, and everything in between. The important things to note on the back of the seed packet are, one, the days to germination. And the days to germination are in that little gray box on the back. That's how long you should expect it to take between you putting a seed in the ground and being able to harvest a crop. Or not harvest a crop, excuse me. Before you see the little tiny first leaves, the cotyledons, sprouting up through the soil. So if you haven't seen your okra in 7 days, don't worry. It takes 12 to 14 for them to sprout. It'll also tell you your planting depth, how far down you want to plant your seeds. Some plants are really, really finicky about this, in that carrots, for example, want to be planted in the top quarter of an inch of soil, which is incredibly annoying because they also want to be 80 degrees and they want to be well watered. And keeping the first quarter inch of soil well watered and warm is a labor of love. It also tells you how many days to harvest. So once you do see those first leaves, those cotyledons sprout up through the ground, you can expect to wait 58 days before you can harvest okra. I will say that plants don't adhere to these numbers. They didn't make them up. They're averages. So you can't mark your calendar for the 58th day and say, okay, it's day 58, I'm going to harvest my okra. You do have to be responsive to the season. If you've had some really funky weather, you've had this, that, or the other going on, it may be a little longer, it may be a little shorter. So account on that. And then it'll also tell you how far apart you should plant them. Okra says 3 inches by 18 inches, so it'd be 3 inches between plants and 18 inches between rows. You can wiggle with that a little bit if you know how large the plants are going to be, because that's the next thing to think about, is not how big are these plants, these seeds, or if you're going with transplants, how big are these guys when I'm putting them in the ground. You need to think about how big they're going to be when they're full grown. So a tiny, cute little tomato transplant, you could put them, really close together because they only need like 3 inches of space. But a full-grown tomato plant is going to be like 36 inches by 36 inches and then who knows how tall. And so you're going to want to plan accordingly for that. Ta-da! That's exactly what I was just saying. And then lastly, I would encourage you to make a planting map. because planting maps help you visualize your space and also help you think about the timing of your garden. So you can visualize if you're putting in, you know, let's just say this is radishes. You're putting in radishes here. You can think about the next iteration and make a few planting maps, maybe spring, fall, or spring, summer, fall, and look at the iterations of what your garden is going to look like. I would also encourage you to spread things around a little bit. One of the best ways to get on top of pest management and disease management in gardens is to make sure you don't have the same plant family in the same place for too long. So if you plant tomatoes in one bed one year, don't plant them there again, because all of the bugs know that that's the place to go. So move them around so you keep the bugs guessing and you keep the bugs on their toes, so to speak. Cool. And that is gardening in a nutshell. Do you guys have any questions? Thoughts? Feelings?
Question.
What's up?
What about starting seeds?
What about that?
Like, I know you're not supposed to just plant them directly into the garden, right? You want to start them. That's what my roommate always does.
Oh, yeah?
No, it's great that you're doing this after I perform, because I'm in charge of my garden for the first time in years, because my roommate moved out. And he was always like starting the seeds way early in the windows and stuff before putting them in the dirt.
Yeah, like right now.
Right now.
Yeah, yeah. So, yes, starting seeds beforehand is a really great way to get plants out into your garden sooner, but it's also a great way to make sure that your plants are a little bit more happy and healthy when they go in the ground, because the transplants are going to be more successful than a seed going into the ground. But you, as a gardener, it's much more cost effective for you to buy seeds because they're a lot cheaper than buying a bunch of transplants. So if you can start transplants in your own home, all the better. You can give them warmth, you can give them light, and it's really the warmth that they're not going to have outside. They need certain soil temperatures in order to germinate, in order to make a plant. So if you can put them in a potting mix, like so, gotta have my props, and put them in little containers, which could be like yogurt cups or egg cartons, or you could go out and buy potting containers. You'll give them a happy head start, and plants going into the ground that are 3 or 4 inches tall are just going to be better adapted, they're more resilient to frost, more resilient to pests nibbling on them, more resilient to, hopefully, diseases don't get them that early. But they're also less likely to be dug up by birds and eaten, because birds are going to dig around in your garden and they might eat all your seeds. So they're more likely to survive.
Gotcha.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, totally.
Cool. Anything else?
What's like one of the hardest things you've had the experience of trying to grow?
I'm actually really terrible at growing tomatoes. I'm really good at the cool season crops that require not a whole lot of maintenance, but tomatoes, man. Last year I forgot to stake them, so they just sort of like, because I was also curious like what a tomato plant does if you just leave it alone. Why do we stake them anyways? But they just ended up sprawling all over the place. So not a particularly good answer, I guess.
You said carrots are really fussy.
Carrots are fussy to germinate just because they want to be warm and they want to be in the top 1/4 inch of soil when you plant them. But once you get them going, carrots are great because you can pack them in. They only need like 3 inches of space. So you can just fill a bed full of carrots. As opposed to a tomato plant, when you first plant a tomato, like a seed or a transplant, I would actually really encourage you to plant a transplant tomato, because tomatoes require so many days of sunlight before they're going to produce a fruit. And depending on our summer, you might not get that if you plant from seed. So if you plant a tomato start, and then the next one is 36 inches away, it looks absolutely absurd. But they do grow that big if you know what you're doing. Another fun thing to do, actually, that I've been experimenting recently is companion planting. So putting things people have probably heard about the Three Sisters garden, where you plant corn, and then once the corn has gotten so tall, you plant beans at the bottom so the beans can crawl up the corn, and then you plant squash after the beans have gotten a head start, and they are your ground cover. So your squash are keeping the soil cool and also keeping the water in the soil in the heat of the summer. Your beans need the vertical space to grow, and so they're not taking up a trellis or not taking up whatever, they're just growing right up the corn stalks. And the corn is providing that support, which is really fun. But you can also do that with a lot of other plants. Like if you plant tomatoes and they get yay big, you can then put lettuce around your tomato plant. And when they get really tall and the sun is beating down on them, the lettuce really likes to be a little bit protected from the sun. And they will reach maturity when you're whacking down your tomatoes, and then you've got these beautiful heads of lettuce.
Are there plants that require less soil, or at least less deep soil, to grow that you actively look for?
Yeah, so the plants that require less deep soil are definitely not your root crops. So carrots, beets, radishes, parsnips, rutabagas, turnips, all those guys are going to want a significant amount of soil to grow down into. The ones that don't require a whole lot of depth are a lot of your greens. So you can grow lettuces, mustards, arugula. Actually, radishes don't need a whole lot of space because they're really small. Who can guess what my favorite thing to grow is? Radishes. But a lot of the bean family, they're kind of sprawly. Because you guys only, how much space do you have in the?
So most of the pallet boxes are only 4 inches deep, and then 1.5 feet wide,
yeah,
and 5 inches across or so.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of experiments going last year as to what would work and what wouldn't, and what really, like, how the root structures develop to really occupy as much space in there as possible. And so a lot of our herbs did really well in the boxes. They seem to not require as much depth and things, but like our tomato plants and things like that, they got to a point where we couldn't feed them enough nutrient or keep enough water in the soil for them to get to bush size. And these are the ones that we planted in big planters that went on to produce a lot of tomatoes.
Yeah, and that has to do with a lot of the plant part that you're harvesting, because the plant is going to first put energy into growing its leaves and growing its plant body before it ever starts thinking about fruit. And if it can't get the nutrients that it wants for its leaves, it's not going to put on a whole lot of fruit. So lettuces, spinach, herbs, you're harvesting the leaves, and that's totally fine in a shallow container. But things like tomatoes or eggplant or something that has to put in extra energy to make fruiting bodies is not going to be as happy in a shallow space. Cool. Thanks, guys. This is fun.